and your desire to change has to be greater than that status quo.
I see a lot of guys struggling with that, where they're not looking at themselves to really see where they are. Like you said, the status quo. Not assessing like, who am I today? Is this in alignment with what I want to do? Is this in alignment with who I want to be?
Requires courage to really look at yourself and say, okay, this is not me, and now I'm going to divorce myself from certain situations.
Part of being a man is that you make decisions, you're firm about your decisions, and then you face the consequences of your decisions, because these are your decisions, right? No one else's. Craig, lately we've had these issues in Seychelles where many men are having issues mentally, and personal development is not something that is forefront for many men. And what I've seen and heard, society as a whole is suffering because of that. Now, the reason, like we're speaking today, is not to address like the expert side of these things, like just to get your view and maybe my views as well a little bit about the development of men in general, like in terms of their careers, in relationships, and basically just general thinking patterns, and how we can improve that in men, because I cannot reach every man in Seychelles one-on-one, and I would like to now, if I can get the views of experts and other people like that are working with men, and then get them out there, now they can use this information and develop themselves how they will. So how do you think you can help with that?
I like that. I think a bit like you, I have interactions with men through the work that I do, the workshops, the coaching sessions, etc. But you reach a point where you realize the impact is limited. So long as you are doing in-person work, it's great to touch lives one person at a time. But much like you, there are some concerns I share about where our men are in society, and I know a lot of people share that concern. So anything that we can do to help reframe narratives, to get people thinking in a different way, especially our men. However I can contribute towards that, I'm keen to. And I think normalizing this, having two guys, two Seychellois guys, sitting down, having a conversation about these sorts of topics, I'm hoping that that will begin other things moving forward.
That's the hope. That's the dream.
Indeed.
Yeah. But on that note, let's start with this. Let's start with personal development, right? I know in your workshops you deal mainly with teams, right? And then you've got some one-on-one sessions as well, right? Where does one start with personal development? How do you start it? I mean, I've got my ideas, but I'd like to hear yours first, and then we'll get into that.
I think the key, well, both words are important, personal and development, but the key thing that I think about is ownership. Ownership. You have to reach a point where you are looking at your status quo, and your desire to change has to be greater than that status quo. So if I put that in other terms, you're looking at your life, you're living a certain way, and you realize something needs to change. I feel like that desire to change needs to be stronger than staying the same. I think that's where it starts. And that process is what I would call ownership, right? Because now you're realizing, okay, I'm not entirely happy with something. Something needs to change. I can play the blame game and point fingers and blame my family or my friends or madam or whatever, right? But ultimately, it's my life. I'm the one in these shoes. So I need to take ownership if I want to change my situation. I'd be keen to hear your ideas, but I think that's the starting point. We need to be ownership, and linked to that is this idea of being proactive as well. Because now you're saying something needs to change.
Yeah.
Maybe the next part is figuring out what needs to change
What
and
needs
how
to
we
change.
get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But until you have that moment where you decide, okay, something needs to change now. Personal
That's that
development
light
is not
bulb
gonna.
thing. Like,
Yeah,
I need to change something because I'm not happy with where I am.
yeah,
Which is pretty much a situation with many people where they're not happy with the way their lives are going,
yeah,
but they don't feel like they can change. So I would say the starting point is, yeah, like for you to realize that yes, something needs to change, and that you have the power to change something.
yeah.
So what it is that you change, then you get into what you can change. We were talking earlier about the thing about autonomy, where you have the power to create your own curriculum, to create your own path in life, to decide who am I going to speak to, who am I going to listen to, who am I going to, whose work am I going to read, or am I going to read,
Yeah.
for that matter. So you have that possibility. Like you don't have to do what everyone else is doing if the results are not what you want.
Yeah.
Right? And I think many people struggle with that. And I'll tell you why I think that. You know how in school you've got this group of friends, right? And then you want to be part of that group. So you start thinking, everyone starts thinking the same, everyone starts talking about the same things. And if there are things that you don't want to do in that group, you tend to overlook that. It's like, okay, let me just let this pass. I won't do this much. I'll do what these guys are doing. Like, just for example, let's say everyone in the group plays football, for example, and then you're playing football. But you don't really want to play football, but you're doing it because that's what our friend group does. That's what we do. That's why I identify as. We can get into the topic of identity eventually. But yeah, it's like, this is what we're about. Because you've got this group, this is what you want to do. But then you get to a point, it's like, I don't really like football. You know? But then how do you navigate telling your group friends who you've created a good bond with, who you actually like, and you want them to be in your lives, that you don't really like football that much. If all you do is talk about football and play football and whatnot, you don't want to be the outcast.
Yeah.
You know? And I think many guys struggle with that.
Yeah.
With being okay with being the outcast.
Yeah.
And that might also, like, maybe the second step would be that, where you're being okay with being alone. Because if you're trying to improve yourself, you have to be, I was reading a little bit about rites of passage, right? That was a couple of years back, where the baseline to most rites of passage in most tribes around the world is the young man, before he becomes a man, or the boy, before he becomes a man, or accepted as a man, one of the basic things that he has to do is disconnect from the tribe. Right? So disconnecting from the tribe is like the first step. And then what he does when he's away, that's when he develops into a man. And then when he comes back, he doesn't come back as the same boy that left. He comes back as a man. And everyone recognizes that. That yes, now that's a man coming back. It's not the same person that left. But we don't have that in our society. It's like you leave and then you come back, everyone expects you to be the same guy that left. Or maybe you don't leave and you're always there, so no one sees the development because they see the same person every day, day in, day out, right? So I know a friend in particular who struggled with that. He left for studies and then he came back. His parents were calling him a certain name that they used to call him when he was way younger, right? When he was still a boy. And he didn't like that. But he wasn't able to tell them anything because he had disconnected from the tribe. But then when he came back and they were treating him as the same guy that left. But he had changed. Then how do you communicate that?
Yeah.
That's another further steps down the line. But to come back to what you mentioned, it's like the first step is recognizing that something needs to change.
Yeah.
And then many people struggle with that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll share a personal story.
Sure.
So I went to university in the UK, and I was studying in the north of England, which is very different to where I grew up. London was a very cosmopolitan city, lots of different cultures, very multicultural. That's where I grew up.
Yeah.
Where I studied in the north was very different, right? Predominantly white, predominantly middle class, richer people. That's not my background at all.
Yeah.
So I remember being 18 going into this completely new environment, completely new culture that I had not been used to for the previous 18 years of my life. I was used to multiculturalism and living in a Sishawa household in the UK, right? And visiting my family here once every year and a half. And suddenly you feel this need to belong. You're like, wow, I'm in this new environment. I know no one here. Mom and dad are driving down the highway to go back to London, 5 hours from here. I need to
alone now.
I'm alone now, right? So when that loneliness hits you, there is a real need to belong to a group. And I remember kind of 18-year-old, 19-year-old me, I'm much older now, but I remember this, we won't get into it, but I remember that need to belong. And I remember meeting like this kind of mismatch of different people as you do at university. And they became friends, right? But there were certain things that they would talk about, certain things that they would do, certain behaviors, certain actions, even simple things like going to the pub on a Saturday to watch rugby. I never went to the pub. I never knew what rugby really was. I just saw a bunch of men running around chasing this egg-shaped ball. But that was not part of my culture growing up. I was a football guy, right? But that need to belong saw me suddenly doing these things that I never really
now
did.
You're learning about rugby.
Right? But was it because I was passionate about rugby and wanting to learn more? No, it was more out of this innate need to belong to a tribe, to belong to the group, right? And even then, if I'm being really honest, in my heart of hearts, there were other things that were happening that I was not necessarily happy with. But in my heart of hearts, I knew there was a misalignment. I knew this is not me. This is not what I'm about. But you need to set that aside because you need friends. You need to belong to this tribe.
Now you're in the tribe.
Precisely. And I remember that misalignment. I knew this deep in my heart, this was not what Craig was. But I also felt that need to kind of conform, right? And I think part of the ownership step that I was talking about is not just knowing that, it's then having the courage at some point to
disconnect,
break away and disconnect, as you say, the child breaking away from the tribe, right? But that's, I'm sure we're going to go into this. That is easier said than done.
Way easier said than done.
I didn't necessarily do that. I waited for my friends to graduate and leave. I had an extra year on my course, and then I was like, okay, now I can kind of explore who I actually am. But it requires courage to break away. It requires courage to really look at yourself and say, okay, this is not me. And now I'm going to divorce myself from certain situations. Now, 30-something-year-old Craig has no issues doing that. But when you're a younger man, when you're a teenager, it's not easy. Because that feeling of wanting to belong, wanting to be a part of a tribe, the activities that connect you, that's really strong. And I think you're still finding well, certainly for me, I was still finding my sense of self as well. I didn't know who I was really. I had an idea, but I knew some things did not sit well with me. But
you're not sure, like, you know what you don't want, at least some of it, but you don't know what you want. So that ownership is important, but you're often fighting that with that sense of wanting to belong. And I think, bringing it back to our men, I think that's something that we have to navigate. And it's hard. It's hard. It's very hard. It's very hard. When you mentioned this thing, I was thinking about a post that I wrote where I think I wrote it like 2-3 times over the past year. That don't worry about finding your tribe, worry about finding yourself, and then your tribe will naturally gravitate toward you. But then that worry about finding yourself, that's something that's not in the minds of many people. It's like, as you said, like, you're comfortable with your tribe and you don't think that, okay, I can find myself first. Maybe that's not in our culture to do that. I don't know. Maybe it should be something that people think about like really figuring out who it is that you are and what you're about. So drawing out your plan, basically, when you were saying this thing about not easy to break away from the tribe. And then when they broke away, it's like, I can finally breathe. Now I can be myself. The tricky thing with that is then you can fall into a new tribe. Like I can attest to that. because it's been in my experience where I've actually experienced that, where in primary school I had one tribe, in secondary school I had another tribe, and then uni it was a different tribe, and then post uni you come back to Seychelles and then like another tribe again. So it's like if you don't make the effort to find yourself, then you'll end up just going into different tribes and then never really finding yourself, because you're just connecting to different tribes.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a recipe that I think also pushes a lot of people down to dealing in drugs or alcohol or whatever, because you might have a group of friends where, as you said, these guys on Saturdays would just go to the pub, right? And you're like, okay, let me just tag along. What about if you have a group of friends who's drinking every day? What do you do then? Do you drink every day with them? Or do you just take a step like that, guys? Okay, today I'm not taking part in this. Okay, but then what are you doing? Because that question might arise. What are you doing if you're not with us? So you must have something substantial to then offer, like as an excuse or a reason rather of why you're not in the tribe.
Yeah.
You know, and that might be another difficult part, another hurdle to go over, to figure out, like, why am I not here? Am I not hanging out with the guys because I just want to be alone at home? That's not going to sit well with anyone.
Yeah.
You know, right? You'd rather be alone at home than be with us. But what does that say about us? You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think that's a very good starting point in terms of breaking away from the tribe and then trying to find yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
Breaking away from the tribe requires courage.
It does.
It requires the courage to know what you're about, to know what's important to you, what you want to do, what you don't want to do. Having the courage to draw boundaries with people.
Yeah.
Having the courage to realize that what you choose for yourself may not be understood or appreciated or liked by others. Took me 30 years to develop that courage. I never had that at uni.
Preaching to the choir, man.
when I think of 20-something-year-old Craig trying to navigate adulthood life, I don't think I had that courage.
Yeah.
It takes a while sometimes.
That was another culture shock for you as well, no? Coming back to Seychelles. That was like 20-something, like mid-20s you came back, right?
I mean, you say coming back, I wasn't born here. I wasn't born here. I never went to school here. I always considered myself Seychelles. You know, I'm a proud Seychelles, but this was not home. It's only been home for me in the past kind of 8 to 9 years.
Interesting.
But when I did come here, I had a stronger sense of who I was as an individual. I had a stronger sense of what I wanted to achieve. There was still an element of wanting to belong. I mean, you and I volunteered with an NGO together, and that was my way of trying to find a tribe and belonging.
That was a different tribe,
That was a different tribe, yes. You have a stronger sense of yourself, but there is still this innate urge to belong somehow. And I think once you get that footing, and maybe this comes with age and maturity as well, and the work as well, you get a stronger sense of, okay, now I need to be courageous enough to take the steps that I want to take in my life. And I think with that comes a certain level of maturity and just being assured in what you want to do as well. Just to share a similar story, but 10 years later from the university one that I just shared, I changed my lifestyle completely in the past kind of 4 or 5 years. Anyone who knew me before would have probably looked at me and seen me double the size I am right now. Not necessarily living a healthy lifestyle, eating whatever, drinking regularly, focused with my business goals or whatever, but I was just not looking after myself. And, that was on me, but a large part of that, I think, was me trying to fit in with what my friends were doing at the time. But I reached a point where I realized this is not
you.
This is not me. This is not good for me. There was a sense of embarrassment and shame as well as to how big I had become. That can be a very powerful motivator as well.
True.
Not saying it's necessarily, not saying embarrass yourself into changing, but it can be a very powerful motivator to change. And then suddenly when that happened, that's when I took ownership to change the status quo, going back to what I said at the very beginning.
That was your light bulb. That was at that point where you realized, like, okay, something's wrong, something needs to change.
So I think in addition to taking ownership, having a strong sense of, I mean, Simon Sinek, he talks about this a lot, having your sense of why.
Yeah.
You know, what is the goal? Why am I here? What am I trying to do? What am I trying to achieve? That gives you something to focus on.
Yeah.
And then everything else that you were doing that you do not necessarily want to do, that does not subscribe with that version of where you want to be,
Doesn't take you there.
that just becomes noise, and then it becomes easier to cut out. But that was a process. I mean, I gave you 2 stories, University Craig and 30-something Craig, and there wasn't much difference other than suddenly I had developed, not even sudden, over a period of time, I had developed a stronger sense of who I am as a human, as a man, and what it is that I'm about.
So that part was more of like a psychological change over that period of time, like 6 to 7 years or whatever it was, that you realize, like, you know, you need to find your place in the world, like who you are. That's more psychological. And then, as you said, over the past couple of years, you changing your habits and stuff, that's, what would you call that? Would like the physical change, or just habit change, or mental change? How would you categorize that, if you would?
So definitely it starts up here. It starts with the mind.
Yeah.
Going through that process where you realize the status quo is not working for me, and I need to change something. That starts up here. That is all 100% psychological.
Yeah.
People look at me now and they look at, I mean, I still have a long way to go, but people look at how I've transformed and they say, oh, what do you do? Is it this? Is it that? The hidden, the bottom part of the iceberg that no one sees is the mental battle that you have to face.
Exactly.
Right? It's the mental battle. And that's often a conversation with yourself.
Yes.
And that's what ownership is. Ownership is looking in the mirror. You can't hide.
Yeah, exactly.
It's having that conversation with yourself to begin challenging yourself, calling your ish out.
Yeah.
and being open to
criticism by yourself.
To criticism yourself. and the prospect of changing.
Yes.
It's reframing it's reframing I can't do this to maybe I could.
Yeah.
You know? And then it's trying to figure out simple steps to continue along that path.
Interesting. During my final year of uni, that was the time where I started really thinking about what am I thinking, or where am I, like who am I really?
Okay.
And it's funny that you mentioned the thing about like looking in the mirror, like figuratively, right? But I actually did that literally.
Okay.
Where I looked in the mirror and I asked myself, like, who the hell are you?
What did you see?
I saw glimpses of, like, just a faint glimpse of the guy I was when I was at A-level. And I was, like, there was many parts of that guy that I was very, very proud of. Like the confidence that I had, basically the confidence was most of it, right? And when I saw that glimpse, it was like, you know, like this light at the end of the tunnel. And I actually told myself, like, look, I'm happy you're still here. Now let's walk the rest of the way, you know? And there were many, many clouds around that I needed to get rid of. And I did so over a space of like 10 years for me to just get rid of all the negativity that was surrounding that guy. I don't know how all that came to be. Maybe because of me pretending to be someone that I wasn't and not being aligned with who I really was. And it was a long process of me accepting that this is there and it needs to go. This is there and it needs to go. Or I need to do more of this. Or I'm really, really being negligent about this. You know, and it's not going to be an easy process in the least. And faced very, very difficult times, very difficult years, where mental conversations were very, very harsh, right? And very few people knew what I was dealing with, and that made it doubly hard, because like in my mind, I'm having these conversations that I'm having this struggle with myself with, are these dark parts still here, or am I past this one? You know, and certain things keep coming back, and then other stuff you deal with along the way. But the past couple of years, though, it's been like, yes, now I've got my head above the water. Now I can swim. You know, and it's been a relief.
Okay.
And this is part of the reason why I'm actually doing these conversations, because I see a lot of guys struggling with that, where they're not looking at themselves to really see where they are. Like you said, the status quo, not assessing like, who am I today? Is this in alignment with what I want to do? Is this in alignment with who I want to be? And I was playing with this idea with goal setting, right? You need to in the process of setting goal in personal development, in particular, you need to have a compass, like meaning this is my North Star. This is the direction that's my gauge. That's my reference point. So if I stray away from that path, this is what's going to get me back onto the path. If we talk about someone who's dealing with alcohol, for example, if that's not part of the person that you want to be, let's say you're like 80, 90 years old, do you want to be known as someone who drinks every day? If not, then why are you still drinking? It's as simple as that. But simple is very, very difficult sometimes. It's very, very difficult to change simple, but it's simple. It's that simple, where you just figure out, okay, this is where I want to be. This is, I think Hormozy talks about that. Like he pictures himself at 80 years old with every decision that he makes. Pictures himself at 80 years old and then figure out like, which one's going to make the best story? And then he does that. That's his North Star in a sense. Mine is not as simple as that, but it's pretty much like that, where I picture myself, if I do live up to 80, 90 years old, then who am I then? I figure out who I am now and where I am now. So I need to figure out like what's the distance between the gap between the two guys, between me today and me at 80, and then I try to tread my path to get there.
So it's almost as if you're reverse engineering it.
Exactly.
You're thinking, You're starting with the end in mind.
Yes.
You're thinking of 80-year-old Loni, 90-year-old Loni, the person you are, the behaviors you're doing, the values that you have, and you're kind of reverse engineering. What are the things that I need to do
now
to get there?
Yeah. Exactly.
What are the habits I need to cut out? What are the habits I need to develop to become that version of me that I want to be? I like that. And that's positive visualization, negative visualization, whatever you want to call it as well. Some people take a similar idea. They imagine, I mean, this is quite morbid, but they imagine themselves on their deathbad and they think about, what...
that works as well. That works as well.
It works.
Because actually I read a book called The 5 Things You Must Do Before You Die. Or the 5 Things You Have to Do Before You Die, something like that. So they interviewed like a lot of people who were like old age, and then like some terminally ill, some people like that. So they were asking them, what are the things that you would like to have done before now that you're facing death, basically? What it is that you would like to have done? And the answers were actually, I can't say I remember what they said in the book, but the idea is that like when people are like this close to death, they know that death is really, really close. That's when they realize what's really important, and I don't want to have to wait then to then realize that, man, I should have done that. Or we talked about the word should before, but you don't want to have regrets at that time.
No, I wanna go back a little bit because you described, when you looked in the mirror, literally, you described in general terms a stormy phase. I think it's fair to say you saw some light, but there were still maybe inner storms that you were navigating. And I think that's that's something that I think a lot of men would be able to relate to. True. We often navigate storms internally, right? I want to hear your thoughts on this, because a lot of the time we hear people say, especially when it comes to male mental health, find someone to talk to.
Yeah. I don't really like that.
Why not?
Because first you have to figure out who do you talk to. And then it gives the impression that you have to find someone to talk to about everything, right?
Okay.
And for me, I've found that, in my life, there are people that I talk to about certain topics, and I go really, really deep into that topic. And then I have other people that I talk to about other topics. Like, for example, if I have business issues, for example, I'm not going to go to my dad with business issues, because I know that's not his forte. I'll talk to someone who I like, sort of like a mentor in that realm. If I want to talk about family issues and being a father and whatnot, that I can go to my father with, and he's quite a wise guy about these things, and my grandmother as well. So you pick and choose who you talk to and what you talk to about. Having said that, there are things that you still need to keep to yourself. These are things that's your battle to have. You can't lay that on other people. And I strongly believe that every man has this set of things that they have to deal with alone. And these are probably the most core things that they have to deal with, like which direction they're going to take their life into, or whatever it might be, that no one can really advise you on these things. because then, I mean, you can listen to other people and their advice or whatever, but there are conversations that you need to keep to yourself. You need to have with yourself. And then after the fact, maybe you can share it with other people, but in the moment, this is your decision to make, and then you own up to it. I think part of being a man is that you make decisions, you firm about your decisions, and then you face the consequences of your decisions, because these are your decisions, right? No one else's. And maybe that's stepping a bit forward into the conversation, but when we talk about relationships, many relationships are failing or have failed because of men not making decisions. I've got relationships that have failed in the past because of me not making decisions. And I think that's a very strong aspect of being a man, where you need to take decisions. And why you're making the decisions and what your basis of these decisions are not always explainable. Sometimes you just trust your gut because you've done the homework beforehand, and you can't really talk to people about that, you know. But there are things that you should be talking to people about. And I suppose each man has to figure out who they talk to and whether or not these are the right people for them. Again, if you know which direction you want to go in, then you can discern whether or not that person has your best interest at heart. You know, like we talked about the tribe before. If you've got a tribe of people who are, I know people who are in tribes who are basically smoking every day, right? If you're in that tribe and you're talking to your tribe about, I don't know, some spiritual issues you're dealing with, or issues in the family, or you're trying to get your act together and whatever, I don't suspect that you're going to get sound advice from this group. Because who else in that group is doing what you want to do? Yeah. That's the question you need to ask. If their path is not going in the direction that you want, then why would you ask advice from them? You know, so that's some discernment that you need to have as a man. And yeah, so this issue about men need to talk, I don't think that's accurate. Yes, we need to talk, and who do you talk to, and what do you talk about? Like, for example, many women say, I like men who talk. I want a man to be honest about his feelings and whatnot. But then you also see many relationships where men are 100% open about everything that they think about, the business and everything. And the wives, either they don't understand it, or they just leave altogether. Because I was like, man, but this guy doesn't have his act together. He doesn't understand where he's going, whatever. It's not like he doesn't understand where he's going. He's just bouncing off ideas off of you to see what they sound like outside of his head. But that doesn't always work, does it? You know, so the advice, all good, well-intentioned, I don't believe it's a good advice to give men, to say, men need to talk, unless you're actually providing a safe space for them to talk.
And I think that's the key, a safe space, right?
Yeah.
And when we're talking about a safe space, it's a trustworthy space. It's knowing if I choose to talk, I'm not going to be judged. I'm not going to be criticized.
Yeah.
You're not going to take my news and pass it on elsewhere.
Yeah.
You know, we're in a country where that happens a lot. You know, nouvelles, actions, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm someone. I have my inner circle. I have people who I can go to and talk to certain things about. But that doesn't stop the conversations within as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, because you're sharing what you want to share with certain people.
There's a filter.
There's a filter.
There's always a filter.
And you know, some people are great to talk to, but maybe sometimes the advice is not entirely appropriate to you either. So I think there's a bit of both. I like the idea of talking to trustworthy people. As you say, though, you need to know what you're getting from that person. So one thing that I value increasingly now, and I'm lucky enough to have this. I don't have many, but you know, I have a small tribe of fellow men who I can kind of share certain things with and speak to. And these tend to be people, going back to what you said, who are maybe further on along in life than I am, you know. So it's great to get that wisdom and that insight and that perspective. And, you know, talking is great, but sometimes it's women who understand women's issues. It's men who understand men's issues, right? I'm not saying we can't swap conversations, sure, but like, I think that's important as well. But when I think of the real seismic changes that I've made, it's often the conversations I've had with myself
Internally, yeah.
And I'm thinking for someone who's watching this, especially someone who's navigating this storm as a man, this kind of inner storm. How do we go about that? Maybe what worked for you? I can share what worked for me. Like, you know, it's.
You mean the internal dialogue, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that storm. We all have this storm that we have to channel. You know, I know I'm notorious. Sometimes I will revert to my man cave and I'll be really quiet and I'll kind of shut people out when I'm processing things.
Yeah.
I don't think that's just a me thing. I think a lot of us guys tend to do that sometimes. And I'm one of the more kind of talkative, expressive guys out there as well, and I do that. But I know I need that space. So I've learned about myself. Craig needs me time.
Yeah.
Maybe a part of that is getting lost down a YouTube rabbit hole, but although I'm not really dealing with the issue, maybe a part of that is going on a walk. Maybe a part of that alone time is going to the gym and lifting something heavy and really processing what's going on in my head. But I know that's what works for me when I'm in that kind of inner storm phase. Yeah. You know, and that's not I'm sure that's not the only set of solutions. And you know, what worked for you, if you're comfortable sharing, like when you were in that period.
There's different phases to it, right? Therapy is one. Yeah, therapy is a big one. I got to a point where I realized that there are certain things that I cannot handle alone. Right? I was very, very closed off into dealing with my own issues, even though I say, like, you know, men, the whole thing about men shouldn't talk or whatever. I'm not saying that they shouldn't talk, but rather there needs to be a filter, right? Yeah. In terms of going to therapy, I believe that everyone can benefit from it. You don't have to be someone troubled or an addict or whatever to go to therapy. It helps you clarify your mental conversations. Yeah. Right? And that's what I gained from it. Therapy was a big one. And then writing out my thoughts. And then self-assessment, in a sense. Like really being honest with yourself. Like, I'll give you one example. Crazy example, but yeah. I know for a fact that over the years, I developed a massive fear. I don't know if I was afraid of myself or afraid of what I was capable of or afraid of my own failures or afraid to face my own failures. So I know the fear was there. So I realized, like, I need to build some courage. How do I do that? I used to surf way back. And then I stopped for many years. And then I said, okay, I'm going to get back into water. Which brings me to another point. Before I get to that, one of the things that I did was go back to my childhood, figure out what I really, really enjoyed when I was younger, and then try to do that again and see if that still worked. Okay. One of those things was surfing, going back to surfing, right? So I got into the water and I realized, like, I forgot how to surf somehow. It wasn't that I forgot how to surf. It was just like I was too much in my head and I had all these emotions coming up, like especially fear, which I mentioned just now. And how I got rid of that was just to do things that I knew I was afraid to do, but I knew I needed to do. Like when I used to surf way back, I used to be super afraid to take big waves. Like any wave above my shoulder, I would be very, very afraid to paddle into. And what my reaction was, if I'm paddling into a wave and I realize like I'm a little bit late, I would try to hold back a little bit because naturally I would do that, right? And then I read something that I just laughed at myself when I read that. It's like, that's like the worst thing you can do, because if you hold back, like imagine a wave is crashing and you're there, when you try to hold back, you're just going on top of the wave and then it's just going to crash right back down. It's going to pull you down. You have no power against the wave. So the best thing to do is try to outrun the wave. So instead of holding back, you actually have to paddle harder. So I was like, it's that simple? Just to get over that fear? Let me try that. And I tried that and it worked. Like I get a wave and I paddle harder. Whenever I was like a little bit like hesitant, I was like, okay, don't hesitate, just paddle harder. Like, I don't know if it's going to work, but this is what I read. This is what I'm going to try. And I tried it and it worked. And then you realize like, okay, maybe it's just about shifting the mindset just a little bit and you get a completely different outcome. And that's worked for me even in business. Like there were projects that I've seen, I said, man, this is probably a little bit beyond what I'm capable of, but that's just my feet talking. Let me take on this project and see that, yes, I can do this. And I proved myself that, yes, you can do this. And now that's me giving myself like a positive self-talk, like, yeah, you are capable of this. And then I went back to me in primary school, secondary school. I was like very academically gifted, I would say, right? Because I didn't study much, but I was able to learn things very, very fast. And I reminded myself of all these positive things that I had before, that I had forgotten about. I was like, you've got something going on for you. So just hold on to that and then realize that, yeah, if I had something positive going on for me before, then I can just nurture that and then go back to a nicer place, I would say.
Okay.
All right. So that's a bit of the process that I went into.
So if I could maybe just
Summarize
and clarify the steps. There was a conversation with yourself. There was an honest assessment and examination of what you did in the past that you enjoyed.
That I enjoyed.
That brought joy to you in your life. There was almost a creative experimentation phase where you were like, well, do I still enjoy these things?
Yeah.
Let me try. Let me give it a go. But not only that, it sounds like you almost created a series of mini challenges. And that's what I wanted to pick up on, because I think creating these little mental battles, healthy mental battles for us to overcome, it builds a resilience. It builds a resolve to...
It rewires your brain, in a sense. I think many people laughed at this when Jordan Peterson was saying, like, part of being successful, the first step is making your bed in the morning. And people were laughing at that. But the reason it works is because it's a mini win. You start with a win in the morning, and then, because there's been experiments that's been done, like the more you win, the more you are likely to win because of the chemicals that are produced whenever you win. So if you can create these little mini wins for yourself, then you sort of like short circuit your own brain to tell yourself like, you are a winner because you wanted this. You are a winner because you wanted this. It's the same with goals. To achieve the goals, like you give yourself mini tasks. Whenever you tick off, I remember we talked about this way back in GS when you had the whole list of activities to do, and then it's like, and it feels so good whenever you tick off something on your to-do list. And it's like, that's what it is.
So you use surfing as an example. For me, the gym has become that for me in the past 3 years.
Nice.
I'm late to the game when it comes to the gym, but it's been a real game changer. People who are interested in wanting to like build muscle, I can't talk about that stuff, but what I know is, in order to build the muscle, you have to put the muscle under strain in the first instance. That is the basic principle of getting stronger, right? You put the muscle under strain by lifting a slightly heavier weight that you can handle. That then results in little tears in the
tears
muscle.
Down the muscle.
Which through nutrition and rest and recovery and all the rest of it, if you do that properly, you then build the muscle up to be stronger. And that's basically what we're talking about in life, right? The hard that you chose is surfing, and you made it slightly more challenging by conquering your fear. And then you get over the fear, and then it builds a little callus, and now you're like, okay, like, let's go on to the next one. And it's the same for me in the gym. It's like, okay, like, I've done this weight, I've done an extra rep today, like I'll recover, on to the next one the next day. You know?
Exactly.
So I think, you know, bringing it back to men, that's what we need to do, right? We need to, I'm not saying go surfing or go to the gym, but I'm saying choose your hard. You know,
choose your hard.
Like, there are plenty of hard things in life that are just imposed on us. But what is maybe the hard thing that we choose for ourselves? Is it building up the discipline of making your bed every day? Is it building up the discipline of reading 10 pages of a book every day? Is it going on a long run? Is it going for a long walk? Is it going to the gym? Is it just something that allows you to build up that discipline where you can see tiny little bits of progress over time?
Progress, that's the thing.
It builds a resolve. It builds a resilience.
It gives you something to look forward to. I suspect that a lot of our mental issues surrounding men is because you don't have anything to look forward to. Like, life just gets mundane and you're just going around in circles. Like, you wake up the same time, you go to work, you don't really enjoy your work or whatever. And then at 4, it's the same things that you do every single day. And then on the weekends, like your timetable is set up for you, you know. But if you take control of your own timetable and then take control of your curriculum, as I mentioned before, like what it is that you do and why you're doing them, because it serves a bigger purpose, then I suppose that would take care of a lot of the mental issues in sales.
But the key is having that conversation with yourself to start with. There has to be that wake-up call. And like you correctly said, and I share this opinion, many men I feel are not having that conversation with themselves.
Not having it.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe they don't see the win at the end. Like, if I'm going to get into something, I'm going to do something that's not easy, something that's hard. There has to be a reward at the end. But if you don't see the reward, maybe you don't feel like, okay, like you mentioned earlier, like the pain of staying the same needs to be greater than the pain of change. But if staying the same means I get to smoke every day and chill, or I get to drink every day and enjoy the drunkenness or the high or whatever, and enjoy the music, then I would rather choose that. Because I do this over the weekend. During the week I work, whatever, but then over the weekend, that's what I do. But if we stretch that time horizon a little bit longer, like instead of thinking about a week or a month, you think in terms of decades. Compare, like, that's sort of like one conversation that someone might have. If you say 10 years from now, you're drinking every weekend. When I say weekend, I mean Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, because that's what a lot of people do. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So that's almost half the week you're drinking. So over the space of 10 years, you've actually been drunk for 4.5 to 5 years, right? As opposed to that, if I drink only once a month, then over the space of 10 years, I've only been drunk like what, 1 year, 2 years? That's a stark difference between, well, actually like 4 times as less. The reason I get to that is I was listening to someone talk about Kobe Bryant. Kobe used to train 3 times a day, minimum. And he was talking to a group of kids like, why do you train 3 times a day? It's like, most guys train twice a day. I train 3 times a day. So after they've trained for 2 years, I've actually got 3 years worth of training in that time. So there's no way they're going to beat me. So these little steps, little changes per day will amount to way, way bigger stuff 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So if your time horizon is 10 years from now, then that, you look at that picture, it's like, is that where I want to be? That's a good start, I think, to think about that length of time.
Yeah, I like that. I have a theory as well. I think it's a self-worth thing as well. I think we have to reach a point, and we're talking about men here, right? I think at some point a man has to reach a point where he considers his self-worth. What do I want for myself? Do I value myself enough to go after what I want? I like to describe myself as a recovering people pleaser.
Interesting.
And I've done a lot of work the past year to figure out where a lot of those people pleasing tendencies have come from. More often than not, it comes from family, it comes from childhood, etc., etc. But part of my ongoing journey is now prioritizing what I want, and that doesn't mean being entirely selfish and cutting people out and only doing my needs.
There is a sense of selfishness in there, but it's like a healthy level of selfishness.
I think so. Because someone with a people-pleasing tendency, and I see this amongst certain segments of men in our country as well. It's like we've been put on this planet to serve the interests of others, right? Men supposedly are the protectors. Men supposedly are the providers, right? So it's all about, men. We've been taught as a society to derive our self-worth from these two things, protection and providing, right? Now, these may be facets of the modern man, for sure, but if we define ourselves entirely on the needs of others, to me, that's problematic.
Of course it is.
Because I may still have these things that I want to try and achieve in my life, fine, supporting and providing for others and being the protector, but I also have my goals and ambitions and things that I want to achieve, right? And prioritizing those comes with a degree of self-worth. It's saying, okay, do you know what? Like, I value myself enough to want to allocate time and resource and money to these things, potentially managing expectations and managing boundaries and saying no every now and then. This is an ongoing journey for me as a recovering people pleaser, and it's hard. It's difficult, but it comes from a place of, no, Craig, like, you need to value yourself as well.
I know of a few cases where the guys in a relationship, they know that they're not living up to expectations, and that has been the reason why they've spiraled down into some mental issue, right? How does one get out of that? Because I'll tell you why. This issue has been plaguing me a little bit, because if the wife knows that, okay, the guy's not living up to expectations, and then she gives him advice, it's like, look, maybe you should do this and that, and then he does what she says. Now it's like he's doing it because she told me to do it. It's not coming from him. And then now, many times what happens, and it's happened to me as well, where I've got women who's approached me and say like, okay, but talk to this guy about this thing, whatever. And I don't know how to approach that conversation, because I know the minute I start talking to the guy, he's going to know that, like, your wife sent me. That's still coming from her. It's not coming from him. I know for a fact that the way that this changes is if the guy wakes up.
Yes.
Right? But then what is going to get him to wake up? Because I've told I know at least 3 women that I've told, you have 2 choices. Either you stay with the guy and wait for him to wake up, or you leave. Because it's on him to wake up.
Yeah.
You can't wake him up.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a difference between men and women, where the women think that they can talk the guy to wake up, but it's not going to happen. We don't communicate the same way, so it's not. That's probably another conversation, or we might get into that a little bit. But the thing is, the guy has to wake up. So how do we get the men to wake up?
So how do we get the men to wake up? I think emotional intelligence is key. It's not something that we teach. It's not something that we value as a society, especially in this country. But I think it's really important. What do I mean by emotional intelligence? It's the ability to know ourselves. It's the ability to want to look in the mirror. It's the ability to want to improve and be honest and look at, what am I doing that's working? What am I doing that's not working? That's a part of emotional intelligence, right? So I think we need to build that up. And maybe now we're talking about, boys at school and onwards, right? We need to build up that appetite for just knowing yourself and your emotions a bit better. Now, I realize that doesn't apply to a large segment, because that ship has sailed for many people.
For many people, that ship has sailed,
I think the harsh reality for some men is that they do need to hit rock bottom in certain instances, or close enough to it. That can be a real wake-up call for some men. I'm not encouraging that, obviously. I wouldn't want that on anyone.
That's not the best route, but
no, it's not
helps.
at all. I'm not encouraging that. But some people need to be fundamentally shaken to realize what they stand to lose potentially. That is sometimes the wake-up call that some men need, right? But it's hard. It's hard. I think I'm still thinking. I don't know. It's a hard one. That's what I have to offer right now. But it has to start with the self. It means, what does that mean? It means going back to what we were saying at the very beginning, looking in the mirror. It means potentially seeing things that you don't want to see. It means deciding for yourself, I want to change, I need to change. It means assessing your options. And if you feel like you have no options, and unfortunately in our society there are some men who feel like they have no options, and they resort to more extreme means, right? It's recognizing, okay, this is a perceived lack of options.
There you go.
It doesn't mean I don't have options.
There's always a way out.
Now, there's a difference between not having any options at all and a perceived lack of options. Perceived lack of options means, okay, I cannot see any options for myself. But a lack of options is I actually have no options whatsoever. So if you feel like you have a perceived lack of options, this is where we then maybe need to turn to what we are digesting? Is it reaching out to family members or friends who can maybe help me assess my options? Is it deep diving on the internet and deep
Listening to
diving into
podcasts and
there's all
stuff.
sorts of podcasts and stuff on YouTube that can help you figure this stuff out. Is it reading a book? Is it so it's a series of very stern conversations with ourselves, but
This is where it is.
that's where it starts.
There was this guy I talked to about, to figure out like, how do you feed your heart, right? I'll tell you why I get into that now. There are two, they say the eyes are the windows to the soul, right? But then there are two windows, the eyes and the ears as well. So what you watch, what you look at, and what you listen to, these are what you feed yourselves.
I like that.
Right. So if you can take control of that, then you take control of a lot of stuff that follows, because you're basically stopping the bleeding. Like I've stopped watching a lot of stuff because of that. Like I knew that either they're taking a lot of my time or it's not the right content for me to be watching or whatever. I put the filter on that and what I watch, and then the next step would be putting a filter on what I say. Like whether or not I'm using profanity, whether or not I'm speaking negatively about people and stuff like that. That's another step. But the first step for me was like filter out what I listen to and what I watch. And I realized in Seychelles, like a lot of people listen to very negative stuff. Either it's conversations with other people or just reading about stuff on Gossip Corner or whatever, like negative things that are happening to other people. This is what they're consuming.
Yes.
And that can't be good.
Agreed.
So maybe that might be the first step for most men, just to filter out, or at least pay attention to what you're listening to and what you're watching, and then what you talk about.
I really like that. That's a good practical step, I think, for us to take a step back and just assess, where am I digesting information from? If I'm watching the news at 8 p.m. every night and it's
What are they showing
largely bad news.
Yeah.
Okay, that's going to inform my worldview and how I view myself, potentially. If I'm on Facebook in one of these mass groups that's all about caca and nouvelle, right? I'm not mentioning names specifically. That's going to inform how I feel about stuff and my mood and my energy levels. So I like that. We place a lot of emphasis on physical health. That's important. But we have to look after our brains. We have to look after our minds as well. And a big part of that is assessing, where are we consuming information from? Maybe you follow 5,000 people on Instagram. How many of those do you actually know?
Good question.
How many of those do you actually have?
Do you actually follow?
Or not even follow, but how many of those do you actually, like, if you saw them on the street, you'd say hi to?
That's another thing. Yeah.
But when we're consuming all of these people's feeds and we're seeing people living their best life, because everyone on social media is portraying an image of living their best life, right? What does that do internally to us? Do we need to maybe
interesting you say that,
trim some of that fat a little bit and do a bit of a cull on social media and stop following certain things and certain people? I try and curate. I mean, I'm not perfect. There are some things I follow just kind of for my own personal enjoyment, right? Sports, football, whatever. But I try as much as I can to curate the content that I watch.
You have to.
That I consume, right? There are one or two hobby-related things, football, other sports, etc. But a lot of it is personal development. A lot of it is business related, because that aligns to my work as a businessman. A lot of it is self-development, topics that I'm interested in. So I'm nourishing my mind, my soul with this content.
Things that are contributing to the guy that you want to be eventually.
Absolutely. Just to add to what you're saying as well, I really examined my habits. And I just tried to look at, where are the moments in the day where I'm not particularly productive and I'm just kind of doing mindless stuff. Right? And I think I looked at the amount of time I was spending on YouTube in particular, just watching non-relevant things, and I was like, my gosh, like what am I doing? Now I'm only 3 weeks in, So we'll see maybe a few months or a year from now where I've been able to sustain this just to keep me accountable. But I've tried to replace that YouTube time with reading. Maybe I'm reading 10 pages a day.
Yeah.
I've tried to replace that time with, there's an online course that I bought online for no more than 200, 300 rupees.
Interesting.
Right. So it's sharpening my skills. I feel like I'm developing, and I'm just trying to, I've self-audited. How am I kind of
self-auditing?
Spending that time?
Yeah.
You know, there's still a bit of time to do the inane YouTube stuff or whatever, but like, how can I better use my time? How can I nourish my mind, as you put it, nourish the soul with things that are more productive and enriching for me as a person? I think that's a great step that you've outlined. Yeah. It's a good
this thing about watching how much YouTube you've been watching or whatever. Alex Hormozy, going back to him again, he mentioned one guy was saying like he doesn't have enough time to do whatever. Okay, but how much time do you spend on your phone? And then he actually took the phone, figured out like how much time you got, like 3 hours on YouTube or whatever it was. There, I just bought you 3 hours. Give him back the phone. And then he realized like, yeah, that's 3 hours of the day that you giving to that app. So you could take that back. You have the power to take that back, but will you?
Yeah.
You know?
Will you?
Will you? That's another motivation. It's like a lot of people would say like, I don't have time to do this. Do you really not have time to do this? Because Jim Rohn, he's like the godfather of the whole personal development thing, right? He said when he was 26, he was dead broke, not enough money to buy cookies from the Girl Scout, and that was his pivotal moment. He realized that he was taught actually by his mentor that he could work 8 hours a day at his normal job, and then work 4 hours during the night to then develop himself to start his own business or to do whatever that he wanted to do. And that's exactly what he did. He worked the 8 hours there, and then he rested a little bit with his family, and then he worked another 4 hours in the night. And that's just the sacrifice that he made.
Yeah.
But a lot of us, we don't want to make the sacrifice, you know, because it is a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice of your personal image, a sacrifice of, because you have to, like, there is this point where you want to change your life where everyone is going to think like, nah, that's not going to happen. They don't believe that you can, or people are going to say negative stuff about it. Like there is a change that needs to happen, but they don't believe it's going to happen.
Yeah.
If you believe it's strong enough, then yeah, you're going to do it.
Yeah.
But if you listen to everyone who doesn't believe it's going to happen, then you're not going to do it. You're just going to believe what they say. So there's a process of you, when you're reinventing yourself and changing your life, like you said, you know something needs to change, and you start changing it. It's not just going to flow. There's so many barriers to this change, and you have to be willing to go through these barriers.
Yeah.
You know,
100%.
and yeah, going back to this thing, like it's easy to make excuses for yourself.
Yeah.
To say, I don't have time to do this. I don't have the courage to do this, or I can't do this because whatever. You have to recognize that it's an excuse. Personal story about excuses. When I was in S5, I played volleyball at school. I didn't realize how many excuses I gave. But whenever I couldn't dig the ball correctly, or I didn't give the next player the right ball, whatever, I would give an excuse as to why. The sun was in my eyes, or whatever. I had a plethora of excuses. And the coach was like, okay, the next excuse you give me 5 push-ups. I was like, okay. So next excuse I give, 5 push-ups. So I do my 5 push-ups. And then during that same session, I think I probably had like 5 sets of 5 push-ups, like within a short period of time. But it didn't click then. Like, the push-ups were easy, to be honest with you. And then he realized the push-ups were easy. It's like, okay, the push-ups are too easy. I just don't want to hear the excuse. You want to give me an excuse? Throw that excuse to there was a tree right by the court that had just been planted. He said, throw it to that tree over there. I don't want to hear it. And then I would play with that. I was like, okay, every time I was about to give an excuse, I was like, oh, I just take that excuse, I throw it. Like, I actually did that. And then that's when it started to click. And I realized that I was doing a lot of that. And I thought, why am I giving that excuse? Where is that really taking me? You know? And in the process, when I was going back to my childhood and stuff, and I remembered that a lot of my report cards, most of the teachers were like, he could have put more effort, he could have done better. Like, my grades were good. Like, I was like top percentile of the class, but still the teachers were like, he could have put more effort, he could have done better. And even my parents would say that every now and again. And I realized, like, yeah, maybe there was something to that. Maybe I didn't put that much effort into things, you know? And that was me finally accepting that, like decades later, and then thinking, like, yeah, maybe I should change that, you know? And I suspect that a lot of people go through that, where they're very hard-headed about the truth of where they are now, and the bad traits that they have.
Yeah.
They just rolled it over as like, that's just a little thing. It's a little thing that's going to come back to bite you, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
You have to take care of that.
Yeah, I think back to my turning point with the fitness journey.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier, it came from a place of shame. I remember being out at a well-known bar with friends in the Bogalo area, and I remember at the end of the night having one too many drinks at this point, and going back home, you know, being 30, 40 kilos heavier than I am now, and just feeling a real sense of shame, right?
Yeah.
And that was the wake up call for me. And you're right. You know, deep down, you know the truth. You know something needs to change, but it's just easier to avoid it, right?
Yeah.
And I think the turning point has to come where you just can't ignore the truth anymore.
Yeah.
It's staring you in the face, and you realize, okay, I need to do something.
Yeah.
And what's the opposite of making excuses? It's taking ownership.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I'm not basing this. Maybe the National Bureau of Statistics can give us some proper data on this, right? But I'm gonna just make this up. I think as a man, if you're a man who's prepared to take responsibility and ownership and accountability for your life, I'm just gonna say it, you're already in the top percentile of men in this country.
Looks like it. Yeah.
I know there's no science to back that up.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how many of us, and I'm no saint. I try as best as I can, but there are moments where it's easier to point the finger and blame others, and I'm working on that. But so many of us just point the finger and blame someone else.
Yeah.
Someone else's problem. Actually, no. A lot of the time, we can self-reflect and look at what we can do differently.
Yeah.
Where did I go wrong? How did I mess up? What do I need to do to change that?
How can I improve?
If you can develop that mindset, even if it's in a small area of your life, you are already on the way to being ahead of most men in this country.
True. Just to, maybe we'll wrap up this conversation in some advice that I gave some secondary school boys. I was telling them that, you know, most of them are now focusing on dating or whatever, stuff like that. Yeah. And I know, like, at the time, it's like you think the girl that you meet now is going to be the love of your life, you're going to be together forever and whatever. And people are going to tell you, look, you're still young, and you're not going to believe them. I was 21 when my dad told me, like, I had this, like, massive breakup or whatever. And my dad said, like, well, you're still young. And I was like, dude, I'm 21. You know, it's like, how are you going to tell me I'm still young? I'm 21, you know? But now I look back at it, it's like, dude, you were a very, very young man. You were way too young for that. But anyway, the advice is that they need to focus on themselves first. Because if a man improves himself, then you get your compass together, you get your map together, like, you know where you're going to go, you know the word that I use with them, you know your program, you know your schedule, your set of, this is where I want to go, right? Then whatever woman comes in your life, they come into your program. And women like that, to have a set program that, okay, this is, at least you know where you're going, you know? But most of these guys, they don't know where they're going. They just know they want that girl. So if you're going to focus on the girl's going to leave eventually to a guy who knows where he's going. So why not focus on where you're going first? That's the ultimate case. So with or without the girl, regardless if she's there, it could be another girl that steps in. You don't know. But at least you'll be set. You'll have your life in order. You'll figure out where you want to go and then achieve that. That should be enough for you, knowing full well that if you do that, everything else will fall into place. And trust that. Trust that process. Although it's not very clear for them now, but trust that process. And I live by that. Like, I focus on where I want to go, what I would like to do, what I would like to achieve like 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And I try as much as possible to keep to that. Like, obviously there are curveballs that life throws at you, but you try to keep to that as much as possible. You know, continuous improvement on that. I
think back to past relationships as well. And I was that guy. I'd put the needs of my ex.
Yeah,
before,
you spoke about the people
me.
pleaser. I was thinking about that.
Yeah, 100%.
I was like that as well, to be honest with you. Yeah.
That's a trait that you carry over in business. You carry it over with your friends, with your family,
everyone.
with your romantic relationships.
Yeah.
It's a toxic trait, right? So I was that guy in the relationship. I was the one that would sacrifice my own thoughts, my own feelings. Oh, maybe I won't go out with this friendship group because
she's not okay
she
with
might
it.
feel a certain way, right? And that's not healthy.
It's not.
And I've actively redressed that since. I firmly believe, especially in relationships, it's important as a couple that you have your goals, that you have things that you want to achieve. But she needs to have her goals too, that she wants to achieve for her.
Because she's an individual in her own right. Yeah.
I need to have mine as well.
Yeah.
I have my goals. Now, the successful relationships, I mean, I'm no relationship guru. I'm not even claiming to be. But I would imagine the successful relationships are, we have our shared goals, but also you're doing you. How can I support you if you need my support? How can you support me if I need your support? To me, that's the ideal in my eyes, at least, right? Like, so, but it's important, that sense of individuality, going back to what you said to these young boys in secondary school. It's important that you have a plan. What is it that you want to do for you? What are your goals? What is it that you want to achieve? Go ahead and build yourself. What's the saying? If you build it, they will come, right? So go forth and build yourself. Everything else will follow, whether that's the right people in your life, whether it's friends, family, business associates, job opportunities. Build yourself. It's amazing what goes your way. I'm not one that subscribes massively to energies. I know people like talking about energies and whatnot in the universe. But maybe there is some truth to it. You build yourself up, and it's amazing what you attract when you do so. Not just romantically, but just in terms of everything in your life.
Yeah, true. That's again with the whole thing about finding yourself, and then your tribe will eventually find you. And I suppose that's a good point to set the theme of this conversation, where basically men need to find themselves first, and then build from that. Everything else will fall into place. Once they find themselves, they build themselves. To me, all these issues can be solved by personal development. If someone focuses on improving themselves in whichever way, whether it's just making your bed every morning, or going to the gym, or eating healthily, or in business, or whatever it is, improve yourself somehow. Find something you want to do a little bit better than you were. Like you were saying, earlier, your goal will be like 1% better this year than you were last year. And that's set a goal. That's a message to all men. Just set a goal. Decide, this is where I want to be, and that's different from where I am now. It's better than where I am now, and tread that path.
Set a goal, and from that goal, be clear about what your first step is. We can set an ambitious goal. I can say I want to be a millionaire by the end of the year.
But then where do you start?
Realistically, it's not going to happen, right? But what is the first step to get me on that path? I think define that as well. Set yourself the goal, but then think, what is the small actionable step that I can take? My first step on my fitness journey, other than the self-awareness, was an actual step. I said to myself, I'm going to take 10,000 steps a day. So my first step was a step. Right? So we have to define these bigger goals. Absolutely, that's important. But then think, okay, well, what's the one thing that I can do daily, several times a week, to get me to where I want to be? How can I push it a little further? How can I push it a little further? Going back to that, choosing your hard, mental toughness. Then it's amazing what you can achieve, I feel, when you do that.
And you improve way faster than you thought you would. Yeah, things happen like that. It's good. I like this conversation.
Me too.
Thanks for stopping by, Craig.
Thanks so much, Lori.
Take care.